to episode 6 of QueerTrek, a Tricorder Transmissions LGBTQ plus community podcast. My name is Marty, and I am joined, as always, by my very favorite Heather. Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm really happy to be back. It's always exciting to be in our little space, so I'm super great. I hope you're doing well, too.
I am doing good. Got a little sleepy brain, but other than that, everything is good. For those who are new to the show, QueerTrek is an LGBTQ community-empowered Star Trek podcast where the topics come from you and your suggestions. Each show, our hosts will be joined by guests from the LGBTQ plus community who will share their stories while discussing the subjects they choose within the scope of Star Trek's 52-year history, ranging from personal stories, episode examinations, characters, and themes in Star Trek, all from a queer perspective. If you would like to submit a topic idea, or if you would like to be a guest on QueerTrek, you can reach us by email at queertrek@thetricordertransmissions.com, on Twitter at QueerTrekPod, or you can use the submission form at queertrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. This is your podcast, and we need you to make it happen. Heather, we recently switched up our patron program. Do you want to tell listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, so after like a year of saying that we were going to, I mean, it took a very long time to figure out what we wanted to do, but we finally upgraded all of our patron perks. So hop on over to patreon.com/thetricordertransmissions and check out our different tiers. You can start as a patron at $1 per month, and it really just goes up from there. One of the best perks, I think my favorite perk of being just $1 patron, is getting to participate in our patron hangouts, which are typically hosted by John Krikorian, but we all make appearances here and there, and those will always be something that are open to all of our patrons and are not at a specific tier. But from that, it goes to perks like getting a free STLV badge if you're going to that convention, getting to make guest appearances on Weekly Trek and some of our other podcasts, all kinds of fun stuff. So check it out when you can. The response has been phenomenal. We've had a lot of new people join us and a lot of people up their patronage. So we're super excited for all that. And I promise, if you find us via QueerTrek and sign up, send us a note via Patreon, and in addition to your Tricorder tribe specific Patreon pen, I will also send you a QueerTrek pen because they're the best of all the pens.
They are. All right, so today we are going to be tackling polyamory. We're going to do like a polyamory 101, and our guest this week is sci-fi writer and YouTuber Jay. Jay, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
It's so good to have you here. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little more about yourself?
Well, I've been a Star Trek fan since I was a little kid and consider it my third parent. It informs my ethics and my worldview, so it's very near and dear to my heart. And then I've been a writer for a while now, and I write mostly science fiction, a smattering of fantasy, both novels and serial fiction. And of course, I have a YouTube channel that's mostly about polyamory, but also about relationships in general and issues pertaining to women loving women and other related things.
Yay! Yes. What is your YouTube channel so that people can find you? Because it's super awesome.
Just search my name, Jay Koyanagi, Koyanagi.
And how many videos do you have? Because you just started doing this in the past I want to say up to 6 months. I feel like it's been less time, but I don't know. You just keep pumping out videos like the rock star that you are.
Oh, you're sweet. I started toward the end of last year, end of 2018. And some weeks they'll put out 2 videos. Most weeks I put out 1 video, though I would like to ramp it up as time goes on. So yeah.
And so what inspired you to start the YouTube channel?
I've been thinking about doing it for a while. I just feel like, there are some great polyamory resources out there in general, whether we're talking about text-based resources, podcasts, what have you, but I don't feel like there are enough. It's still so few. And I wanted to be able to put out my perspective, especially as someone in the LGBTQIA plus community, and all the related issues. There aren't a lot of people talking about what it is to be a woman-loving woman and polyamorous, or ace and polyamorous, which I am as well. So yeah, I thought I might have something to offer.
Yeah, and I don't know, I share the YouTube with a lot of different groups. I've shared it in our QueerTrek group. I've shared it in a couple other LGBTQ plus groups. Again, just because there aren't a lot of voices out there, and it's really important to have those perspectives. I haven't gotten to watch the most recent video, but I know that you did kind of a listener feedback video. And so I'm curious, like, what type of questions came up in that one? Not to spoil the video, but just a basic idea.
It was a lot of mostly personal questions about me, like, how old am I? How tall am I? Things like that. There were a handful of polyamory related questions, such as like, how do you deal with marriage in polyamory, especially if you want to approach it in a sort of egalitarian way? Is that even possible? Religion and polyamory, which was an interesting question. Yeah, it was sort of all over the place.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, you're going to find a lot of questions and a lot of answers on your channel.
Yes.
So some of which we will talk about today. So I am curious a little bit about you. Do you want to tell us about like your poly lifestyle at all? It's up to you how much you want to divulge, or just like, when in your life you found that path and so forth.
Sure. I've been polyamorous for about 8 years, roughly. And for me, of course, my story, my history, my experiences are just mine. There's a lot of diversity in people who practice polyamory, both in the people themselves and how they approach it. So just for the listeners, keep in mind, like, the way I do it might not be the way the next polyamorous person does it. But I came to polyamory, as many people did or do, through being in a relationship at the time. And both of us, luckily, had sort of danced around the idea of being polyamorous for a little while. And we both decided we wanted to dive in. And we are still together today. So that's great that worked out. Yeah, ever since then, I've been practicing polyamory in one way or another, mostly an egalitarian approach where I don't really have one main partner and then other partners. I just have multiple partners, all of whom are, more or less equal in so far as you can use that word to describe anything. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I've learned a lot.
Yay. Sorry. I'm just excited to be talking to you on our podcast. Jay is a longtime personal friend of mine. So she's super special and awesome. And she was really a gateway into polyamory because I just didn't really know a lot about it. And I think that, like many people, I had a lot of misconceptions and confusion surrounding like what polyamory is, connected to polygamy and stuff like that. So do you want to give us kind of a quick breakdown of what polyamory is?
Sure. Yeah. So polyamory is engaging in or potentially engaging in multiple romantic relationships at the same time, but with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved. And that's the key part. Everyone has to know and everyone has to consent.
Consent is important.
What was that?
Consent is important.
It is very important, yeah. And that's what, some people will say, oh, that's cheating, or, oh, you have a mistress or a boy toy or whatever the case may be. And, some people perhaps might look at it that way, but as a general rule, that's not the case. There is no cheating because nobody is being misled. Nobody's being deceived.
Yeah.
And in many cases like mine, there's no main relationship to be cheated on. It's or to have a mistress too. It's multiple relationships, period.
Yeah. And there's such a spectrum. And I know that you've shared stuff on social media, and I think even with your videos about like how different people practice polyamory. And so for some people with polyamory, there is a main relationship. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that kind of polyamory?
Sure. You can think of it a few different ways. A very common way to refer to that would be hierarchical polyamory. There are a lot of value judgments that can sometimes come along with that label, though. So, at least on my YouTube channel, I try to get away from that language unless I'm specifically referring to hierarchical dynamics. I called it the primary partner plus others approach to polyamory, which is what it sounds like. You have this primary partner, though perhaps the partner you're building a life with, that you're married to, or even if not, just the one that you sort of default to as your plus one, for example. And then you might also have other additional relationships, be they sexual or romantic. Although in polyamory, typically the thing that differentiates polyamory from just, say, for example, swinging or casual open relationship is the romantic component, where you do have a full-blown romantic relationship, whether it's a little more on the casual side or very serious. But yeah, so hierarchy or primary partner plus others would be, having this one main relationship.
I actually wrote a paper about non-monogamous polyamorous relationships in college, and my main thesis statement was that these kind of relationships help curb jealousy. Do you have any have you ever been in a situation where maybe one partner was jealous of another, or do these kind of relationships pretty much keep that emotion on the curb?
Big topic, but I think that it really varies from person to person and dynamic to dynamic, because some people are just inherently, just sort of naturally, more or less inclined toward feeling emotions like jealousy. And that can be for so many reasons. But it's actually a common misconception that jealousy is either universal or completely absent in polyamory. There are plenty of people who do feel jealous, but for people who embrace polyamory, feeling jealous is simply kind of like a flag or an indication that maybe something is going on either within yourself or within the dynamics that you have that isn't fully, they're not fully fulfilling you, or it's somehow indicating that something's off. So if, for example, a person feels jealous that their partner is going bowling with another person, with a different partner, maybe they didn't realize that, gee golly, I've wanted to go bowling with you for years and we've never gone bowling. And that's really what the issue is. It's not that they're going bowling with someone else. It's that, oh yeah, I wanted to do that with you too. Silly example, obviously, but it can indicate things like that. Other times it can be, a legitimate flag. Maybe you're jealous because someone is actually neglecting you in the face of a new relationship, in which case, and it can happen, in which case maybe a conversation needs to be had on how we can reconnect.
Lots of communication. You need to know how to communicate. It's essential. And I don't want to sound judgy at all, or anything. There's been I don't want to say a movement, but I see more and more younger people moving to open relationships and polyamory. And I'm actually really happy that I'm seeing people share articles about it on social media and talking about it, because it's not just polygamy and a man that's married to 5 women. There's a difference. And so I'm happy to be seeing polyamory A talked about, B talked about positively. But then I also wonder if there's a gray area where, talking about the specificness of having, romantic relationships, and especially, long lasting relationships. On the point of communication, for me, I know that I do not feel comfortable having multiple partners until I have a long-standing history, with the person I may be with originally, and we have that mastery of communication, I guess. Stuff will always happen. Relationships are human things. That makes no sense. How do I say this? No relationship is perfect, and we're always going to miss opportunities to communicate here and there. But I just wonder, with people practicing more open relationships and passing it as polyamory. Do you see that happening, or do you notice a trend, and how do you feel about that?
Well, I think that how a person defines polyamory sometimes varies a little. Like even within polyamorous communities online, like discussion boards and what have you, where there are a number of very experienced polyamorous people, there will be a little bit of infighting about is an open relationship, is that polyamory or not? And some people feel very strongly that it is, and others feel very strongly that it isn't. So I guess that's a little disclaimer there that the opinions are going to vary. But, I feel like open relationships and non-monogamy are kind of umbrella terms. And non-monogamy definitely encompasses polyamory, but polyamory isn't all of non-monogamy. And same with open relationships. Like I don't ever refer to my relationships as open, because even though in theory they are, because it often does imply there's a particular relationship that is open, that determines the open status. Whereas for me and the people that I'm with, it's the individual that comes into a connection stating, I have polyamorous relationships from the very beginning, apart from the one person that I was with when I was still monogamous. And therefore there's no one relationship that is saying, hey, we are in an open status and in theory we could close it. It would be far more complicated to close my relationships at this point, because it would have a domino effect on a number of different people. So for me, open relationship doesn't really apply, or as a term, it doesn't really work for me. But for other people, especially people with a primary relationship, it does work really well to indicate, hey, this is a relationship and we're committed, but we're just open. So, yeah.
What do you think, like, I don't know, what is the most common type of question or pushback that you receive from people that don't quite understand what polyamory is? Like, what's kind of the top myth or question?
That you haven't found the right person yet, clearly. Because if you had, you would not want polyamory. If it's true love, if it's meant to be, then it is automatically going to be monogamous, because your ability to feel anything beyond platonic buddy friendship for anyone will evaporate entirely if it's the right one for you. Maybe that's true for some people in the world, but I found it's untrue for many people.
It's no. Oh gosh, I'm not surprised that's the most common one. And how do you typically deal with that?
It depends. If someone's just expressing their opinion in the world, I don't really engage, because they're just they're doing
don't feed the trolls, as they say.
If they tell me directly, hey, you person I'm watching or talking to, this is what I think, I'll just acknowledge that they're totally allowed to feel that way, and that I do feel differently than they do, and that if they want to talk about those differences in worldview, we can totally do that. But if they just want me to hear them and understand that they think this is wrong, then I'll tell them, well, I hear you, and I understand that you think that's wrong. Sometimes people just want to be heard.
Hear them and move on. I mean, and that's an approach I've been taking, even just with fandom in general, and life in general, but especially in this kind of divisive time of social media. I've been less about, I either don't engage or I try to engage in the most positive way possible, and then just walk away. And mute people and let them scream into the void. Like, there are people out there that want to have open conversations, and that is always a delightful and wonderful thing. But otherwise it is very much feed the trolls, and I'm just going to question everything about you and what you do. So I don't remember if you had a video talking about being ace and poly, but do you want to share a little bit about that? And then maybe just tell us about you. I'm really not eloquent today, so forgive me for asking dumb sounding questions.
Oh, they don't sound dumb at all.
Ah,
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about being ace and poly. I don't have a video on that yet. Although
okay.
I've discussed it in a handful of videos, I do think I'll put out a video on it at some point. But yeah, for those listeners who don't know what asexual is, or ace for short, it's very straightforward. It's just lacking sexual attraction to anyone. So if we think about being heterosexual, you're sexually attracted to the opposite gender, or homosexual, same gender attracted. Asexual people are not attracted to anyone. So if you imagine the gender you're not attracted to, if there is one that you're not attracted to, that's how ace people feel about everyone. However, people who are asexual can feel romantic attraction. Not all ace people can, but many can. And so if you imagine being in love, but just you're not having sex, that's what it can be like for people who are ace. There's a lot of diversity within asexuality. Some people have a different experience than the one I just described, but that's a very brief overview. And if you do want more information on the many different permutations on the asexuality spectrum, there's a great site for that called AVEN, AVEN. And I think it's the Asexuality Visibility and Education Network. I strongly recommend it for anyone who's curious about the details. But as far as the intersection of being asexual and polyamorous goes, it depends on the people who are involved, how well the two mesh. A lot of people see it as a very natural sort of coexistence, because if you are asexual and you're with someone or want to be with someone who isn't asexual, there's this idea that, well, they won't be completely barred from engaging in sexual activity because they could have partners who are sexual and still be able to be with that asexual person. And that is true. If it works for everyone involved, then that can be a really lovely way to be able to have the relationships in your life that you want to have without, without a sexual person ending up having to sacrifice being able to be sexual at all.
Right.
That said, I think it's pretty important to remember that there are people in the world who, maybe they would in theory love to be with you, but they do actually need sexual engagement in all of their romantic relationships, because for them, that's part of being in a romantic relationship, and that's okay. Sometimes people just aren't compatible.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I don't engage in sexual activity with anyone. Asexual people who choose to engage in sexual activity, even though they're not attracted, because of, well, there's a lot of reasons why a person might do that, but I don't. And it has worked out very nicely that I have partners who are either okay with that and they just have sexual partners as well, or are ace themselves, which is always lovely. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a big attraction for me, just I never really understood. I think up until I met you and you started talking about polyamory, I just, like I said earlier, I didn't really understand that it existed, or that it wasn't something like the like big love, or what's the
Sister
other, yeah, an example of polygamy. And I'm not going to say that polygamy is a bad thing either. I'm not here to, we're not talk about that, but for me, coming to a point where I understand, oh, okay, I this is who I am. I realized that it allows you a way, given that, and I think I've talked about my story a little bit in the past, where I haven't gotten a lot of opportunity to really explore myself as a poly person. It's been very brief. Past relationship that I was in, we never branched out to having relationships outside of our own, aside from sexual relationships, which was an unfortunate thing. And now I'm monogamous, and I have, I date a man, and we're super happy. But I know that for me, like, that it may change at some point, and he's very much aware of who I am, and open to those possibilities, because I find that for me, it's being able to live that way. You're living as authentically as possible. And I feel that because of how we think about relationships, and that, a relationship should be about, for two people and about two people, I'm just going to shut up now because like my brain is not functioning.
Sleepy brain.
It's, I think that my issue, and we can cut all this out, is I know that like I put a lot of pressure on myself when I even try to, it's that imposter syndrome thing because I haven't had the opportunity outside of, a brief period to really get to live as a poly person and explore that. And it's unfortunate for me in some respect. Like I'm really genuinely happy in my life and I don't feel that it's something that I have to have right now. It may be in the future. But I think that especially being an ace person, you get to live so authentically and be yourself and be loved, and so are your partners, and no one is being shoved into a box of I have to sacrifice this in order to be with this person. And I think like when you find people that truly understand these parts of yourself, it and allow you to live that way, it's just a really awesome thing. But you can cut out this whole part of me just talking gibberish and ridiculous stuff because I feel
not gibberish. I think you bring up an interesting point about polyamory, like whether you've been able to fully explore it or not, but feeling like you are polyamorous.
Yeah,
it's just like, I mean, for some people polyamory feels like a kind of relationship orientation where they are innately inclined toward loving multiple people. And other people feel like it's more of a choice where they're happy choosing to live polyamorously, but they could in theory be monogamous if the situation were right. And for me, it's more of a choice. Like I don't feel naturally monogamous or polyamorous. But if it does feel like a natural innate thing for a person, not having acted on it doesn't make you less polyamorous, in my opinion. Just like if you are bi and you've only ever been with one gender, maybe you married your high school sweetheart and you're blissfully happy. That doesn't mean you're not bisexual. You're still bi. Just because you're with a person and you're monogamous doesn't eradicate the other parts of your attraction. So it's the same thing. Even if you're monogamous or you haven't your polyamory, it doesn't make you less polyamorous.
Well, thank you. It is something that I do genuinely struggle with. Because had my life played out a little bit differently, like after I got divorced, I really I wish I would have taken more time to get to live as my authentic self. I am just naturally driven to romantically love multiple people at the same time. It has happened throughout my entire life, and I just never really understood what it was. However, like, and I can't explain it. So it's not like now because I'm in this, monogamous relationship with a man that well, if we stay together I hope we stay together for the rest of our lives. I love him so much that doesn't it doesn't mean that I'm not ever going to love another person. It doesn't mean that I will. I don't know. It's just, that's how life works. Right.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's, as a queer poly person living, dating a cis het man and having a monogamous relationship, I struggle a lot, especially just not having had those life experiences. And while I am genuinely happy in my relationship and I want to be in my relationship as long as possible, I do still regret not getting able to explore other parts of myself. So who's to say what will happen in life, but it's definitely something that I struggle with, and even struggle with in doing this podcast and having my queer voice and being a queer person. Like I've been a queer person for a long time. I just didn't understand it until later in life. And
that's normal, I think. Especially people in our generation. When I was a teenager in the 90s, it was still taboo to be gay of any kind. And back then, of course, we just called it being gay. And I came out really young, and in some ways that's been a good thing because I've developed a sort of emotional fortitude around that whole issue. But at the same time, I was ultimately kicked out of my house, had to move to another state. It was rough. and I lost friends over their homophobia. And yeah, so I feel like people in our generation, it's not uncommon to not have had that opportunity to explore different aspects of who you are, because we were taught growing up, or many of us at least were taught growing up, either by our families or just by culture, that either it didn't exist or it was wrong or gross or what have you. And yeah.
And even now, like, it's still like I have come out on Facebook and talked about being a queer person and a poly person, and I just I tend to explain it as, I love differently, I love frequently, and I love all kinds of people, and I'm okay talking about it that way, but I'm also, it's difficult because I feel like I have to water it down for a lot of people, to help make people understand that, again, at the end of the day, this is just about like who we love and who we're attracted to.
Sure.
And it is a lifestyle change, and it's been amazing just being open about being poly. The more open I am, like, obviously the people who are okay with being out about it, react and tell you, oh, I'm poly too. And it's just like, oh, how wonderful. Like, you find, safe people, that understand what it is. And sometimes I get questions, but for the most part, it's just like finding another Trekkie in the wild, right? You're like, oh, we have something in common.
Totally. And I think, Star Trek, it sets people up to be able to accept this kind of diversity, IDIC, right? Like, so it's just, for me, I think, been part of the substrate of my personal history that allowed me to embrace these aspects of myself.
Yeah. And I think polyamory came up once. So, and I should have done some research, because I know that Phlox, the denobulins, they have multiple, it's like every man has three, like they each have three spouses or something.
Yeah. Everyone has three spouses, from what I understand. I loved the scene with Tucker. I thought that was super funny. Of course, his discomfort was telling, it was supposed to be the future, but today we're more accepting perhaps than the projected future of the time, but that's always the case.
Yeah, I know that some people, with the way that the denobulins were spoken about in their polyamory, that it came across more as like a joke or something funny to viewers,
right?
And I see that, but there are also times where I felt like just having Phlox talking about that part of their culture, and talking about it positively was a really great thing. Because again, like, just setting it up as this is something that's totally normal.
Right. Yeah. I think it was sort of a double-edged sword. Like, it was something that was intended in some ways to make him more alien, which obviously has its issues. But at the same time, in his mind, it was a normal thing, and it at least planted the seed. Representation isn't always perfect, but I'm always happy, especially the farther back you look, it's going to be more and more imperfect. And so today, perhaps representations would be a little bit more either positive or at least neutral. Not that it was a negative representation, just that it was a little dicey.
It's one of those things that Star Trek tried to tackle, but they didn't quite hit the mark, as we've talked about in a previous episode. So
it happens.
That's kind of Star Trek's history with queer representation up until Discovery. But well, I don't feel like there's even enough there for us to incorporate, the denobulins into the episode in a larger way, because it's so minimal, and I can't really recall any. I mean,
the only real episode that dealt with it was the one where Phlox's second wife came to visit the ship, and that was the B plot. It wasn't even the main.
Yeah, and that wasn't the best.
No, it was just kind of like there for comedy,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's where it's, again, not the best served. And maybe in all of the upcoming Star Treks we'll see more. I don't know that we will. I think that they're
I think
doing,
if anyone would be the right choice to represent that, it would be Captain Georgiou.
yeah. Yeah, that, I mean, she's, despite the trope she falls into of the evil bisexual person,
Yeah.
they could counteract that and just make her an awesome I mean, again, it's still like an evil queer person, but they
Well,
could
maybe
try to.
I don't know if she's going to stay evil forever, because if she's going to lead a new Star Trek show, they have to turn her around. Like, we
Yeah.
can't be rooting for a bad guy the whole time, you know.
Well, we won't say too much. I don't know. I don't know that Jay's all caught up with Discovery, so
Not
we don't want
yet.
to spoil anything beyond that. But
The evil bisexual person's definitely a thing that, I mean, even Kira, like alternate universe. Kira, like I love her. She's one of my big Star Trek crushes, just saying. But you know, I definitely couldn't have done without the evil bisexual.
yeah, or just the hypersexual, you know, all mirror version people are all hypersexualized. Like, look at Hoshi, you know, basically using sex to take over the empire there. One day we'll get some better representation there. I mean, they're trying. Discovery is really great. Discovery's, I think, is doing a pretty good job despite the pushback that they've gotten. But again, we won't go into all that since you haven't seen it all.
I do think that we're still lacking in polyamorous representation in the media in general.
Yeah.
I mean, we get some through reality TV. I have thoughts about all of that. But,
yeah, I still find a lot of things very skewed, and it's, again, like, I commend, like, I think Lisa Ling did an interview with, I'm trying to think, it was a while since I watched it, but it was like a rural country situation where someone had met someone else online, which happens all the time these days, and she wound up moving with him and his wife, and it was like, oh, and ultimately it didn't work out. And just, I find a lot of situations where it's not that they intentionally showcase these relationships, but they find a way, or something happens where it winds up just, you know, not working out or showcasing the negative aspects. And then that inherently just paints this negative picture of polyamory instead of a positive one. I don't know. Have you found any, like, really positive representations of polyamory?
In written fiction more so than in television or film, there may be television or film representations that I haven't yet seen that are good, but I can't off the top of my head think of any that were especially great. But there are a lot of science fiction and fantasy writers tackling these subjects. I would say N.K. Jemisin works a diversity of relationships and orientations into her work. She's fabulous. You have to check out her work if you like fantasy, especially. And Cameron Hurley also does a lot of diverse orientations and relationship styles in her work, and different representations of found family, for better or worse. And I think that a lot of people could really resonate with her work too. So yeah, those are the two main authors that I would recommend. If you like YA fiction, I know Melinda Lowe. She wrote a series that featured both bisexuality and polyamory, called, the first book I believe was called Adaptation, and it was really good.
I feel like I know her name, and I'm wondering if I read a different series from her.
Melinda Lowe is famous, or at least in my opinion, famous for the book Ash, which was a Cinderella.
Yes, yes. I think she wrote, and then she did Cinder. Like, she did a couple of that type of story. So yes, that's where I know. Okay, so now I need to go pick up some new books. Yay, because I just didn't. Yay, awesome. Woohoo, yay. All right.
I'm going to need a new bookshelf after this.
All right. I'm trying to think of some really good questions. Or are there any other myths or misunderstandings that you feel are important to talk about?
I definitely think that, apart from the one I mentioned earlier about, it's not true love if it's
Mm-hmm.
polyamory, is that it is just hypersexualized.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to imply anything sex negative either. Like, if you are someone who enjoys sex and you want to have sex, then get yours, like do what you want to do. But polyamory isn't just about people getting their rocks off. It's not just about not being able to settle down sexually. There
Mm-hmm.
is a sexual element to many romantic relationships, just like there is in monogamy. But just like two people coming together in monogamy, we don't typically, unless we have a reason to, think it's entirely about sex. Neither is polyamory entirely about sex. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
swinging could be considered mostly about sex, or
Yeah.
sometimes being monogamish might be considered mostly about sex, depending on
Yeah.
who you ask. But polyamory, what differentiates it is that the relationships go beyond that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about my experience because a lot of times when you do mention your poly, then you kind of get swept into, oh, and you're swingers. It's like, it's no, not, I mean, there are plenty of people in the swinging community that are poly, but
Mhm.
not all are, and vice
Yeah.
versa.
And I know plenty of people who are in open relationships, but they're not poly, which is
Yeah.
more about sex than it is about romance. So,
Sure, yeah. And another thing I think people misunderstand about people in open relationships or about swinging is that it's just crass sexual contact, which by itself is fine if that's what you want. There's nothing wrong with that. But many times people have open relationships and engage in sexual activity with very dear friends
Mm-hmm.
and
yeah.
people that are important to them in their lives. They're not in a romantic relationship, but they have a great sexual chemistry in addition to being great D&D campaign members or something. So,
Yeah.
it's not always just total strangers you pick up at a bar. It's often people people who are friends, and you have a very warm and honestly pretty wholesome friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been on both sides of the spectrum where it's like, okay, these are people that I would just really like to have sex with. But
Mhm.
then what I find, especially in the swinging community, and I guess I'm just outing myself right now about this stuff. But, but, even within that community, I find that the majority of couples and beyond want to find friends that they can build. Like if they don't already have friends and it happens naturally, which it has for me on several occasions, that you want to find people who you can connect with.
Mhm.
And again, like it is a nice way of, if you are poly people, or if maybe just one of you is a poly person, because that's another misconception, is that
Mhm.
not everyone in the relationship has to be polyamorous. I have a friend who's monogamous, and his wife is not, and that's a whole other podcast now. And I wish I could have him on to talk about his experience, but I don't think he's out or anything like that, but it works for them. Like
Mhm.
again, there's just different sides of the dice, of the kaleidoscope, I like to say. But yeah, ultimately, I think a lot of people do really value having a relationship, and then also knowing that they're being safe with other people. Because I think that's might be another question that comes up for people is, well, if you are in any relationship where you're having sex with other people, and maybe not necessarily with your partner, because there are some types of polyamory where both partners are involved with a person,
Mhm.
or all together. And how are you making sure that everyone is safe? And I think that, for some people, having that relationship and having that communication, and I don't want to necessarily say rules, but that knowledge of these are the things that we're doing, um, inside or outside of the relationship to be safe, is a big
Sure, yeah.
deal. Um,
We mentioned consent earlier. To be polyamorous requires consent. And I think that part of consent, especially sexual consent, is having all the information. So when it comes to STIs and just sexual safety, sexual health, and pregnancy and all these other issues that can come up, it's not really possible to fully consent to sexual activity if you don't know all the things you're exposing yourself to, or potentially exposing yourself to. So part of it is being honest with each other about what you are or aren't doing as far as birth control or other forms of protection are concerned, as well as your exposure. Do you know what you may or may not have? When was the last time you were tested? What are those results? Do I trust this person to tell me the truth so that I can actually consent to what I'm doing? Because if someone lies to you, then you didn't really consent, did you? So it's a big issue for sure. Like, there are dishonest people in every walk of life. And so you will find them in polyamory, like you will find them everywhere.
Yeah.
But hopefully building some kind of friendship with people, even if you are just swinging or just in an open relationship and not fully polyamorous, having some baseline friendship can establish, I trust this person to tell me the truth about their status and to tell me the truth about what they're doing with other people. So.
And just for some people, having, it doesn't necessarily need to be a romantic connection, but just having a connection with a person, makes those sexual experiences even more enjoyable. And I think that's just a general life rule about sex, right? And there are plenty of times where we can just have a roll in the hay, and that's amazing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I was really interested, and I think part of why I brought up the question earlier about age, like, again, I think that there is a lot of positivity with being able to talk about polyamory and open relationships, and being open sexually. Like, the narrative is changing, where it's just much more positive.
It's all about sex positivity now. Yeah.
And so that makes it easier to be open about being poly, or to talk about those things in public, or to out yourself as a swinger in a podcast, which I'm not right now. I just have been in the past. But I think part of it, like, again, with, it's only my personal belief that for me, I know that I need to have a long-standing relationship with established trust and communication before I feel comfortable, even bringing up, talks of being open or polyamory with that person. And I've found, especially like within the swinger community, a large part of the swinger community are older, mature couples who've been together for a really long time, and then have founded that communication and comfort and trust in their relationship, and then open up to that. And I see that more than I see younger people, but that isn't a reflection or a statement necessarily. And again, like as we've said, it's, I don't have kids, and I don't have a lot of really young friends, so I don't feel like I can accurately talk about what's going on with teenagers today. But I do feel that it seems like teenagers have a bit more, it's easier for them to be who they are, which is great. I think there's still struggle with a lot of queer people getting to live authentically, and especially with something like polyamory, again, because it's still something that's very misunderstood within the community. But I think overall, they're becoming more comfortable. God, I am the worst at being eloquent today, and I don't know why.
You're not. You make perfect sense.
There's so much in my head, and it's hard to get it all out in a really good way, especially when I'm self-conscious about what I'm saying.
No, I think you make perfect sense. I think it's true that, fortunately, as the years go on and generations move forward, there is more and more acceptance. And so it makes me really happy to think that some of the ways in which I wasn't accepted as a teenager, or wouldn't have been had I known about polyamory at the time, I guess, that today maybe teenagers, depending on where they live, of course, have more of an opportunity to just be who they are without being ostracized for it. And at least I certainly hope that's the case. It seems to be the case. And I do think that, you brought up an interesting comment there about swinging communities. I've never been in one, but I have heard that it's mostly slightly older generations. And by older, I don't mean, in your sunset years necessarily, but you don't find a lot of early 20-somethings necessarily. And I think there's a cultural thing going on there. Like, I think these days, if I'm understanding it correctly, that it's not like very common to go to a specific swinging community. It's more that you would just never make an exclusive commitment to someone early on in the relationship. And then you might be just with multiple different people at the same time because you haven't made an exclusive commitment.
Yeah.
I could be totally not, I could be missing the mark there. That's just been my impression of things, because like you, I don't have a lot of younger people in my life, but you know, I do participate in a lot of, or witness a lot of online discussions, and that seems to be my impression.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people these days have started saying, you know, I don't understand what the difference between polyamory and just dating is. And because nowadays dating means being with many different people until you make an exclusive commitment. So, yeah.
And that's where I just get a little nervous. On one hand, I don't, you know, poly, and I will just refer people to your YouTube channel. And then towards the end of the discussion, I'll ask if you have any other, you already mentioned the one website, but if you have any like poly specific websites, but, you know, first and foremost, you know, go to those places to learn, and because you talk about so many types of how people practice polyamory. It's not just one or two ways. It's different. And I think it's really important to understand those differences. So there is a spectrum, but I worry about the misinformation or miscommunication and that parallel of, oh, well, I'm sleeping around, I'm not committing to anyone, therefore I'm practicing polyamory.
That happens.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, again, I think there's always going to be people who are either misrepresenting themselves intentionally in order to manipulate people in any population, or people who misunderstand what the terms mean. Maybe they really are thinking that they're being polyamorous, but they misunderstand the difference between polyamory and just dating casually, which of course is that you do actually make deep and abiding commitments, but it's just to more than one person. Whereas just casually dating, you're dating. And you can do that in polyamory too. So maybe the early stages of polyamory look like monogamous dating. I don't know. But you know, I think that as far as like the different styles of polyamory go, there are definitely a lot of them. And the best way to figure out what works for you is to understand what you're looking for in relationships. And if you know that you do want to have this one person who is sort of your ride or die, and that's always going to be the case, but you just want to be able to be with other people too, there's a way of approaching polyamory that centers that. But if you also, on the other hand, might imagine in yourself building a life, a home, a family with multiple different adults, there are different ways of approaching that too. There's pretty much a style of polyamory for anyone who might want to have some form of polyamory in their life, and finding the right people who want the same thing that you do. That's really the key, because you don't want to be with someone who wants to be your ride or die when you want to have like 4 ride or dies. If you know what I mean? Like it's just being honest about what you want, knowing yourself. These to me are the keys in being successful in any venture in life. And that would include polyamory for sure.
Yeah. And I think too, I'm really big on like acknowledging that there's fluidity to our identities at times. So like the way you practice polyamory one year may be different from the way you practice polyamory 2 years from then. It may or may not change, and it is important to recognize those things, and if you have a partners along with you for the journey, to communicate those things as well and let them know. Trying to think, Marty, do you have any questions?
Yeah. So polyamorous relationships and, let's say, cheating, does each relationship get its own set of rules? Like, do the rules kind of change with each person?
That's a great question. It depends. As always, it depends. Each person or set of people might approach polyamory differently. There are people who feel very strongly that rules, whatever those rules end up being, are incredibly important for stability and for being able to establish a sense of trust and understanding. And that's totally fine as long as everyone is on board and wants those rules and does agree to the rules. that you put forward in a given relationship. And it is going to vary from relationship to relationship because different things are important to different people.
Yeah.
On the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum are people who feel that rules are innately unethical in relationships. And then you have everything in between. So really, again, I think it's finding people who are on the same page with you about how you want to approach relationships, whether you want to have rules and which rules, if so, and whether you just, the way that I tend to approach it, for example, is I can't think of any overt rules that I have in any of my relationships, but we understand what we all want. And if I have a partner who, I think I said this in one of my videos, that if I have a partner who hasn't proposed a rule that I text them if I'm going to be late coming home from something, but they just get anxious when they don't know why I'm not coming home yet. I don't need a rule to tell me my partner is going to feel anxious and worried and sad if I don't text them. I love my partners. So if I can do something to help them feel better, I'm going to, as long as it's within reason, of course. But if I don't need a rule telling me I have to text them if I'm going to be more than an hour late coming home. I just know that I can do this very simple, easy thing that takes very little from me, very little effort to make them feel worlds better. And other people with more dicey kind of situations like sexuality and love and commitment might need rules to be able to feel like they can do polyamory at all. And that's totally fine. Or you might just not like rules, and that's also totally fine. Find people who feel the same way that you do, or that can at least get on the same page with you and vice versa.
That's something that I wrote about in my paper that I can't find. That it's one of those things where you get to define your relationships with other people, and not every relationship's going to be the same. It's going to be, maybe person X doesn't want you to do this, but person Y is okay with it. So it's like,
Yeah, there are people who have rules around, how many people you can date at any given point in time, or the genders of the people you can date, which is a whole thing that would, in my opinion, probably be its own podcast. Or around how involved you can get in terms of life enmeshment or entanglement. Like you can only have one spouse, but you can have as many girlfriends or boyfriends as you want, or what have you. And as long as everybody is happy with that arrangement and happy with the rules, then to me there's nothing wrong with it. I think where things get a little sticky or tricksy is that a lot of the time there's a person who's essentially dictating the rules or deciding unilaterally that something isn't allowed without conversation, without negotiation and consent. And that can end up, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it can end up making people feel coerced into whatever situation they're ultimately in.
It sounds like the whole thing basically comes down to lots of communication and just being
for sure.
transparent with everybody.
Yeah, definitely. Communication is a skill that really will only serve you positively in all areas of life.
Yes.
But I find that polyamory kind of forces the issue. Some people will claim that people who practice polyamory are skilled in relationships or more enlightened or something. And I don't think that's true at all. I just think that what ends up happening is that if you decide to engage in polyamory and you really work hard at it, it forces you to have to engage with these issues. It forces you to confront a lot of your demons because they're going to be brought to the surface. Yeah. Monogamy can definitely do that too, but just more people involved means that more people are pushing your limits, pushing your pushing you out of your comfort zone, and that forces growth sometimes.
Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself. Like even when you think you're prepared about certain things, and even over lifetime, like talking about jealousy and stuff, like you may not inherently be a jealous person, but you might at some point find yourself in a situation where you're feeling jealousy, and it's really just your insecurity about something over here that you haven't talked about yet. And so you have to do that. And I know it was a struggle for me when I first started getting involved in learning about polyamory and practicing polyamory, was communication, because I had no communication skills, like very poor communication skills at that time. And so I just didn't feel comfortable myself talking about things. And over time, you know, just life experience and other relationships have forced me to do that, which, like, the one advantage of having been in a bad abusive relationship is that I learned all about communicating.
Yeah.
And then now but even, you know, now I have the effects of that. And even where, like, communicating with an abusive person is not a positive thing always. So again, there's just, like, overall, there's a spectrum just because it's life and we are people, right? Like, uh, I don't know. I feel sometimes like we have to continue to explain, not to our queer family, but to our straight family, that we do get listeners who don't have a lot of exposure to queer culture. And it's, I find that I have to, or I feel like I sometimes have to remind everyone that queer people are not homogenous. We're not the Rainbow Club. Like, it's yeah, we're and you know, even within our community, we don't know all about each other. It's a spectrum and a kaleidoscope, and at the end of the day, though, we're all people, and a lot of the struggles that happen with polyamory happen just because of their relationships, and we all have relationships. But yeah, communication, I think, is essential for all of us, but is extremely important with polyamory.
Well, I think that all relationships are systems, you know, and so the more people that you add to a system, the more dynamic that system is going to be, for better or worse. And I think that accounts for a lot of the diversity in polyamory that you see, a lot of the styles. And, you know, I feel like if people are having a hard time wrapping their minds around maybe a loved one's relationship or a loved one's approach to relationships, as the case may be, that the best way to come to terms with it or to wrap their minds around it is to, again, communicate. Just express that you want to know more about it. Just like maybe someone who has a family or friend in the Rainbow Club, as you put it, then maybe just ask questions, respectful questions, of course, but just questions that express a desire to understand, not an interrogation, not prove to me it's okay kind of questioning, but just a, hey, I care about you and I want to know about you. And I think that can go a long way toward, you know, resolving a lot of the misunderstandings people have, if there's just a genuine openness to understanding other people.
Yeah. And I think that is really, it's really important to highlight, like, just saying, I want to learn about you. Like, I think you're interesting. I want to learn about how you live your life this way. I think that a lot of people, especially right now, it's the time that we live in, where, like, everything that you say on social media, more so on social media than in person-to-person communication, but there's just a lot of criticism, especially when it comes to things like race, sexual orientation, identity. I think a lot of people that are not within those communities don't know how to approach speaking to people about their communities. And so I think that ultimately, like, it doesn't need to be like, what is polyamory? Like, I don't get it. Or it could just say, I want to learn about you. Like, tell me about this part of your life and who you are, and not so much about a thing, but about the personal process. Because I think that looking at polyamory as a word or a, you know, one-dimensional understanding of what that word is very different than tell me about your life experience.
Sure.
And tell me how you love differently. Because ultimately,
tell me what you love about your girlfriend, and then tell me what you love about your boyfriend, because they're both important to you, and I want to know about them, for example.
Yeah, it's. So here's a question: how do poly people meet other poly people?
The way that you meet anyone, really. So obviously that's a flippant answer, but in truth, you know, you can meet people who are polyamorous or non-monogamous in any way that you meet other people. I once dated someone briefly who I met in a meetup group for minimalism, which has nothing to do with polyamory, like, clearly. But you know, a lot of polyamorous people, if they're looking to date especially, will use OkCupid, which is a dating app or a dating website. And the reason people use OkCupid specifically is it actually creates options for people who are non-monogamous. It gives you the opportunity to, identify that way on the site.
Oh.
There are a number of questions that are asked on the site that do pertain to polyamory and non-monogamy. So yeah, there are a lot of people who practice all kinds of polyamory who are on that site. I know that other polyamorous people have used just standard dating apps like Tinder as well. I personally don't. I've never really used Tinder, so I don't know how successful people are on there, but I've heard of people meeting their partners there.
Tinder is dumb because no one ever messages you back.
I just used it for like 3 minutes and I was like, I can't know enough about a person from 5 words about them or like 5 sentences. Like, my OkCupid profile was it was a novella basically, like, because I'm weird, and that was fine if people looked me over because that's not the people I was interested in. But yeah.
Another great place to meet people who are polyamorous is this is going to be more helpful for people the bigger the city they live in, but local meetup groups. There are usually 1 or 2, at least, polyamory related meetup groups through meetup.com or possibly through like Facebook groups that might exist in any given city. And you'll have some for general non-monogamy, you'll have some for polyamory specifically. You might even have subgroups for other specific types of polyamory or dating groups versus discussion groups. So whatever you're looking for, be it just connection and community, friendship, or actually dating, you can probably find a meetup group that caters to that. But if you're in a more distant location, maybe a rural location, online groups can be really helpful. Things like Facebook groups, things like, I think there's like a subreddit for polyamory. I think that there are probably groups in all different kinds of, online resources, depending on what it is you like to use. So Twitter, I know, is another great place that people connect.
Yeah. I think meetups is where I first started. And then, gosh, I'm trying to think if LiveJournal was still around at that point.
Wow, LiveJournal.
But yeah, it's much easier. I think generally a lot of people are just a bit closeted about being poly, and may not be as open. Like I rarely come across someone else in the wild, so to speak, that is openly poly or that I know is poly. It's usually that I mention it. And it's difficult because I want to be the person that tells everyone, like, live as, I've said the word authentic like 6 times now, but it's just, my vision of a perfect world is everyone gets to be who they truly are without worry of oppression. And I hope we get there someday, but I also understand that it's not easy for everyone to just put themselves out there. And so I think that for that reason, like looking for these groups, whether Meetup or Facebook, and OkCupid. Is OkCupid still free?
As far as I know.
Up to a point.
I know
they have premium features.
Yeah. I always used it because it was free. And then I heard that they were going to start charging for it or something. But I like OkCupid because, despite it being primarily, I guess, a dating page or app, it's also just a nice place to find friends. Like, you don't have to be there looking for any kind of romantic or even sex. You can just be there for friends. So
yeah. No, there's an option there to indicate that you're only there for friendship.
Yeah. So I would say, number 1, if you want to learn more about polyamory, just go to Jay's YouTube channel and watch all of the videos, because I think you just do a really phenomenal job of answering questions and, of course, talking about polyamory in a super positive, fun way, and boldly growing your
yes.
Understanding of yourself and how you live your life, but then also your creative skills, and everything else. And then, do you have any other communities or pages that you recommend, like specifically for polyamory?
I do think that I'm not on Facebook anymore. I deleted my account. But if you are on Facebook, there actually are a great many groups, just discussion groups, that can be incredible resources. And, you know, a lot of the time they're set to some sort of privacy setting where nobody can know that you're in the group. So you don't have to worry about grandma discovering that you're interested in polyamory. And then there's a book that came out some time ago that is imperfect but still useful, called More Than Two, and it was written by Eve Rickert. I do want to offer a disclaimer that there is a second author on that book that is currently undergoing some Me Too accusations, and I have some mixed feelings about recommending a book by this person, but Eve Rickert is the other author, and she deserves to have her voice boosted all the same. So I just wanted to offer that disclaimer just so that there's some transparency there. But her contributions to the book are wonderful. And then, yeah, honestly, YouTube can be a really great place to find people who are not just me, but, you know, different people who are sharing their polyamory journeys. You can find triads who take, you know, vlog videos of their day-to-day life together. You can find people who are in more conservative approaches to polyamory that maybe have like a primary partner that talk about their way of approaching it. So I think those are a very personal way to engage with people. And then there's a podcast called Polyamory. I haven't listened to it in a while, but I used to listen to it a lot. I just don't have as much time as I used to. And I remember it being very, very helpful, and that the hosts were very personable and engaging. So that's another place to go.
Cool. I didn't know about that at all. Yeah. I think for me, I tend to want to recommend that instead of watching, again, just because I haven't found many like representations of poly on TV that did it justice, that reflected what polyamory is in a positive way. Or a way that just didn't make it focused about sex. Like half of what I feel like I've watched, or probably more than half, is okay. You know, they at least will showcase the romantic aspect of the relationships and partnerships, and especially with like 4 or more people, how they live their life together. How they each may or may not have a relationship with one another. And then if there are children, which is a whole other aspect of polyamory, and bringing children into the fold. But then it's like, oh, but here's also the part about sex. Like, we've got to make sure and highlight it with sex. And while on one hand, yes, sex may be an important part of those relationships, like it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with polyamory. We don't just need, I think this one might've been on like HBO or Showtime. So it's like, here's this side, but then, okay, now we have to,
is it Polyamory, Married and Dating?
And one of those, something like that. It's been a while since I watched one, but I just remember being turned off by the fact that it was like half like quasi documentary, and then here's porn.
Yeah,
like the way, yeah. And it's like, there's one way to represent sex, and again, like people, you assume, that's the other thing. Like, you assume with a lot of these documentaries that you are actually seeing polyamorous people in relationships. But I think, especially with something that showcases the sexual side of it so much, it does make me wonder. I don't know. I always worry that I'm just going to offend people with things I say, because like I'm not against, like, here are 4 people that are being interviewed and they want to showcase this side of their relationship because it's very rich in a sexual way, and they're showing how you can have a loving, exciting sexual relationship among these 4 people, right? Like, I think that is all really great. I think that sometimes it's less about those connections and relationships and that positive message than it is showcasing polyamory, and then showcasing that side of polyamory, because so many people equate the sex with polyamory. And so we've got to make sure to include this anytime we talk about polyamory. Lisa Ling's didn't, because it was on CNN. And while they may have talked about the sexual aspect of the relationship. It was one man and two women, and the women were not together. It was just that he had two different partners. I enjoyed that more, but then it was just difficult because it's like, well, this just ends negatively instead of just, this is a poly family, or like, here's just a really overall positive representation of polyamory. It's not a tragic thing. It's just a beautiful, wonderful, happy, connective thing.
With reality TV especially, I think it's important to engage with it. If you're going to engage with it, to engage with it with a heavy dose of skepticism, because it is very heavily produced. And so for something like what was on Showtime, which was Polyamory, Married and Dating, which might be the show you're thinking of. I don't know for sure, of course, but they actually asked me to be on that show like a long time ago. And I obviously I wasn't on the show. So I said no, because I'm just, I don't know, not really about putting quite that much out there.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an element of titillation that happens with shows like that, where they want to retain their viewership or garner viewership, and titillation is a great way to do that. And I'm all for sex positivity. I want people to feel like free to express themselves sexually, but I feel like on the part of the producers, a lot of it is, how can we drive viewers to our channel, during this show? And sex is a great way to do that. So
yeah,
I think reality TV can be interesting, but I hope viewers will try to keep in mind that a lot of the scenarios are manufactured and, they're staged, and it is what it is.
Yeah, definitely like partial eyebrow, like Vulcan eyebrow raise as I watch a lot of things. So like ultimately what I was trying to say was that I think instead of relying on that type of media, it's really important to go to, and sorry guys, like Jay did not pay me to promote her YouTube channel. I just think it's that great. And that's why I am endorsing it so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But like, I think that going to the people living these lives instead of this mass produced stuff, or, otherwise produced for whatever reason, is a better place to get your information, like from the people living those lives instead of from people filming people that are maybe living those lives. And I think that goes for really anything. I got some slack the other week because I had read an article someone shared where a cis white dude, well, not that matters, but this dude was, cis het dude, so take out the cis white because that didn't matter. The cis het dude had written an article about LGBTQ plus representation in Star Trek, and oh gosh, I hope he doesn't listen to this. Apparently I didn't know who this person was. But it was very obvious to me that it was not someone in the community. And by no means, when I posted my little thing, did I mean that only queer people can write queer stories, or only queer people can write about queerness in Star Trek? Like, obviously that's not the case, but I do care more about hearing about queer lives from a queer perspective and from queer people. Mm-hmm. So like, I care more about hearing about polyamory from poly people than I do a non-poly person trying to talk about it, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. It's like, I go to the people when that happens, and anyway, sorry.
No, it makes perfect sense. Even in fiction writing, in the science fiction and fantasy world, publishing world, there's a movement called Own Voices, #OwnVoices, where there was a push to boost the voices of people who are writing their own experiences. Mm-hmm. So, you would have a lesbian writing lesbian fiction because they know what it's like to be mm-hmm. a lesbian, and so on. So, well,
and that's one reason, like your was it your first book that came out, Ascension? Mm-hmm. Features queer characters. One of those queer characters is disabled, and forgive me if outing you as disabled, because I don't want to do that, and we can take that out. But it's important for me that you are writing part of your story there, and I feel like those voices deserve to be heard first. right?
Yeah.
And then there's definitely room for allies, or, well, I guess allies is really the key word here, to write about queer people or other marginalized people, but especially for a sect of life where so much is misunderstood. It's just
Absolutely.
important to go to the source, I think. Um,
I know for me, like speaking only for myself, of course, that if I have recommendations coming to me about, something, that I'm going to be excited by good representation, no matter who wrote it,
mhm.
within reason, but that I'm going to get extra excited if I know that a person, that it's an own voices work,
Yeah.
that a polyamorous person is behind the work if it's a polyamorous story, and so forth. So I'll be excited by good representation regardless. But yeah, I'm going to be more excited if I know that it comes from a place of experience.
Yeah. I'm going to have to check out that hashtag because I didn't know about it. So that's what I'm going to do. Well, Marty, any more questions on your end?
No, I think I asked everything that I wanted to ask.
All right. Well, I would say for our listeners, if you have any more questions about polyamory, send us a note. You can email us at, what's our email? QueerTrek at
QueerTrek
thetricordertransmissions.com.
at the tricordertransmissions.com.
Yep. So send us a message there because we would love to have Jay back for Polyamory 101 Part 2 or something if people have
You
more
can also
questions.
shoot us some questions on Twitter too at QueerTrekPod.
Yep. Yep. But it's a big subject, and again, it's one that I think a lot of people just don't know a lot about. So this was kind of a very basic intro type episode. So if there are more questions, again, Jay answers so many on her YouTube channel, but we would be happy to collect questions and bring Jay back if she would like to return.
I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Well, in the meantime, I don't know how open you are to giving out social media information, but would you like
Sure.
to let people know where they can find you in the social media world?
Absolutely. I'm on Instagram, jkoyanagi, as well as Twitter, same username. And of course, there's my YouTube channel. And those are probably the three places you'll find me the most online.
Excellent. Well, do you have any closing words or anything you wanted to say?
Oh, just, if you have questions for me, you're welcome to hit me up at any of those places. I'm generally really happy to talk about polyamory with people. And, if you want to explore different relationship styles, I hope you feel empowered to do it because life is short and love is big. So, do what's going to make you happy.
Hear, hear. Well, Marty, where can we find you if people want to continue the conversation?
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter at Time Travel Marty. And of course, we're always accepting idea submissions over at queertrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. And Heather, I know we had a small conversation about it, but we basically decided this is going to be a queer podcast first and a Star Trek podcast second.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have any topics that you want to submit that don't have anything to do with Star Trek, that is okay too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think especially since there is a lack of queer representation in Star Trek, like we are limited by things we can discuss as displayed in this episode. There's not a lot of polyamory to talk about. So yes, our goal was really, or is really, to amplify queer voices and to let you tell your stories. So again, QueerTrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. There's a contact form there that you can fill out, or you can send us a note at QueerTrek Pod on Twitter. I am at LLA Posper, and then our network is at Tricorder Show. Again, we'd love to have you join our Patreon family at patreon.com, the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you do that via this podcast, please just let us know so that I can make sure that you get one of our beautiful QueerTrek pins. I think we're like 130 something days away from the big convention in Vegas, STLV, which I think Marty and I are both hoping to be there. So
I'm hoping, yeah. I got to put some 20s in my jar so I can.
We have to make it. We have to make it happen. But let us know if you'll be there because we would love to see you there as well, and maybe do some LGBTQ plus meetups for our family there. So,
maybe a live podcast too. Who knows?
oh yes, that would be super awesome. That would be great. We would love it. So until next time, live, love, and prosper.